We have a focus where we are probably looking at 2/3 of our churches being in North America, the other third being outside North America. So it is a majority of North American churches. So that is my context, but I do believe we have enough global understanding to at least speak somewhat to what is happening worldwide. The churches that there's several things that happened. First of all, when the pandemic hit, we began to find out what churches were doing during the pandemic. And as a result, we learned a lot. We learned a lot how many churches who had never.
So let's begin to talk about the church in a
outreach
post.
began to do so. During the pandemic, we began to look at patterns of how they were ministering to people, the churches, even though they were not able to be physically present. And then we started just looking at them in what I'll call the post-quarantine world. And I sometimes refer to it as the post-pandemic world, but that's stating that maybe the pandemic is completely over, which it is not. But in the post-quarantine world, and basically what we were seeing is that churches had significant in-person declines. They had stopped most of their community outreach and ministry. And it is fascinating to watch now what is taking place, because in many ways it is like watching a lot of new churches restart and try to find their footing for a new message and a new time and a new community. As I said in my presentation, there is much to lament about the pandemic, but there's also much to see as opportunity for moving forward, because this truly is a new opportunity. And what we will be watching at Church Answers is very clearly how our church is taking the opportunity that God has given them to move forward for such a time as this. And you'll be hearing reports from us about that in the future. So I'll pause now and see if you have any specific questions, or if you want to bring in other comments as well.
Things we can lament about, but also the many opportunities that come with it. I'll be back to you. Maybe to you, Dr. Florence, leading this big organization across many continents, different cultures, and COVID, as much as it affected us across the globe, I'm sure you had different nuances in different communities. And how did it also affect you as a leader, leading these vulnerable people, now dropped further on because of the pandemic?
Well, first off, I want to really appreciate that as leaders, we are having this conversation. In many ways, we go through things alone, and leading can be lonely. But when we can all come out and begin to evaluate what happened and what is happening and what will happen, and discussing those things together, it begins to bring in inspiration, a feeling that we stand together. Yeah. So just want to appreciate the organizers of this conference. Yes. And the opportunity for us to discuss these things in an open way, becoming vulnerable to each other. Yes. It's healing in itself. Yeah. For me, it goes back to when the pandemic hit, because it was so providential. What I saw the Lord had prepared me and prepared us for, in what looked so mundane. Yes. I was traveling at that time. I was in the US, and I was just thinking, this thing is so far in the distance, out there in China, like, let's keep going. Yeah. And then after some time in the US, I came over to Europe. Yeah. And we were attending a conference with fellow medical doctors. Yeah. What we were discussing that time really was about medical missions, and how we can be appropriate in our times. Mm-hmm. We finished the conference. It was maybe about 40 participants. Yeah. And I went on to do other things in the UK, one of which was to speak the following week in a church. Yeah. And I could just sense the tension, the anxiety in the congregation as we began to present the message. In fact, it was around that time that they announced a case had been found in Kenya. So it began to come home to me like, wow, we are in this. It's no longer out there. So that evening, just before I traveled to Kenya, I got a message on my email that 4 of the people who had been in the conference with us the week before had been found they had COVID, and we were all being advised to quarantine. So coming home to Kenya, I came almost realizing, wow, I'm coming to quarantine. I may be even sick and not knowing what could be next. So from JKIA, the international airport here, I went into quarantine. I began by saying it was providential because those 2 weeks in quarantine was a gift to me and was a gift to the ministry that I lead because it was almost like inspirational. Something came into me going back to 27 years ago when I was trained in disaster management. And I began to ask myself, wow, for such a time as now, I was trained for this. And I had been trained in public health, but just to be equipped with disaster management, it brought all the memories back of what can be done. How do we apply the principles of disaster management to this? The good thing is I was quarantined, so I wasn't shooting instructions or up and about doing things. I was having a time of reflection. I was having a time of evaluating. I was making calls to our leaders, and we were beginning to come up with what will response look like? What will mitigation look like? And what will recovery look like? Even though we didn't know for how long we would be in it before we come to that stage of recovery. So those 2 weeks really helped me to evaluate what was it that the Lord was calling us to do and how could we do it together. So yeah, I would say 2 things came out of that that have continued to lead on. The first thing that we did was with the senior leadership team, we were asking ourselves, what is it that we carry as an organization that is absolutely essential? Our core calling, what is that? So almost like redefining it. We were imagining like you're going through the sea and the ship is sinking. What can you throw overboard? But what must you keep to still remain valid as your identity? And once we identified that, we began to ask ourselves, what is it then that we've been carrying that we can throw away so that it doesn't bleed us during this time of crisis? That to me was absolutely essential for us to identify as a team and be able to agree on how do we move forward during the crisis, after the crisis, and even into the future. Yes.
Thank you. You're coming back to that thought. You identify things you must throw away. I'm glad they didn't throw you away.
Yes.
Because then you can be speaking to us.
Yeah.
We'll be coming to that. Tom, coming back to you. Are you still there? Good, Tom. This pandemic.
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you.
Sorry, Tom. I think we're having some challenges on sound. But you said the pandemic offered some opportunities. Could you share some opportunities from where your standpoint and your ministry that began to emerge out of the pandemic with us?
One of the major opportunities that arose was a new focus on sharing the gospel, basic evangelism, Acts 1:8. In many churches around the world, evangelism had been grossly neglected, and the pandemic offered an opportunity not only for reflection, but refocus as well. And when we began to look at, as I indicated in the conference, in the presentation you just saw, the last words of Jesus were, before his ascension that you will be my witnesses. And it was in concentric circles from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Unfortunately, for the majority of churches around the world, evangelistic witness, gospel witness has declined precipitously. And the pandemic has caused a number of churches, and we're really in an estimate right now because we have more anecdotal information than database, but we're estimating about 15% of churches across the world have now reimagined, and in the godliest sense of the word, what our churches could look like if we truly became a focus on evangelism. So that is one of the major things that has come out of the pandemic that has been a positive. And as we just heard from just about some of the things that could have happened personally, churches also began to see what really mattered and what they could stop doing and what they needed to continue doing. So that's just a kind of a re-emphasis of what the response we just got. Several years ago, I wrote a book called Simple Church. And in that book, I talked about we have to focus upon those things that really matter in order to minister, in order to share the gospel. And there's so many things that we do in the lives of our churches that have marginal value. So during the pandemic, there was this refocus not only on evangelism, but indeed upon all of the activity of what a church does and what needs to move forward. The final thing that I would say is there is not a healthy church unless it is a unified church. And although there were issues of disagreement and even malcontent during the pandemic in churches, many churches came out of this with a new sense of unity, not just purpose, but unity as well. And Christ himself said, you will know them by their love. You will know them how they love one another. And 1 Corinthians 13 is often used as the love chapter is often used to talk about the love between a husband and wife, or used in the context of marriage, which is absolutely fine. The primary origin of 1 Corinthians 13 was the Apostle Paul writing to a church that was divided, almost in chaos. And he said the solution to all of this is to love one another unconditionally. And so he gives the description of love. Chapter 12 of 1 Corinthians is about problems in the church. Chapter 14 is, but there's this pause about the unity and love that we should have. So those three things have been incredible positive benefits that we've seen come out of the pandemic for many churches. A focus on evangelism, a decision about what really matters, what we can keep and what we should discard, and finally, unity in the church. If those things continue to grow in churches, I have great hope for the future that maybe we are entering a promised land instead of still wandering in the wilderness.
Imagine the future, looking at what is important, because sometimes we get caught up in the mundane things and forget. And so, Dr. Florence, you're talking earlier on almost similar to what Tom is saying, refocusing. You began to think about what can we throw away. Can you just build that thought for us?
Yes, certainly. I think it was actually very humbling, because you begin to think all that you have become familiar with, all that makes sense to you is all important. And especially if you've been in it for a few years, priorities begin to shift, almost like you lose your focus. For us, just identifying what's our calling. So life in abundance is called to serve the poor and the vulnerable. So realizing it's a focus on the poor and the vulnerable. But God has also given us the how through the local church. So it was realizing this has to be done through the local church. So it's about equipping, empowering, working with, engaging the local church. And so we realized we may not be there tomorrow, but this entity, this one that Christ said, I will build my church on this, it had to stay, and it had to be taken care of.
Yeah.
So it became our number one priority, that organizational structures and other things that support that could change, could be secondary, but that needed to be supported.
Okay.
So once we identified that, it was easy going forward, that this is who we are going to take care of.
Yeah.
That as we make adjustments, this is one place that we are going to stay focused on.
Yeah.
Our partnerships with the local churches in the communities where we serve, whether those be in Haiti or Jamaica or DR Congo or Egypt, that was the focus. The local churches in the communities.
Yeah.
But the other things that we realized were not as central as they were, and they took second place. It just meant now we knew where to prioritize our resources. Indeed, it actually led us to what our response was going to be with our partners. We began a campaign, and the campaign was, we have to feed the shepherds so that they can feed the sheep. And we were looking for people to be able to sponsor our pastors so that they can go through this crisis.
Yes.
And we were asking people, support a shepherd.
Yes.
And that's who we supported, because we realized things had changed. Congregations had no longer been having congregants.
Yes.
And tithes were not coming in. So it was, we need to take care of the pastors so that they can continue to take care of their congregants for this to be sustained. So that assessment of what's important or what is not important really led to the plan, almost like a contingency of when this comes to this, the first thing to go will be the least. And when the worst comes, the church, we will hold on to that until we cross over this. I would say that also applies on a personal level. Because I think crisis is such a gift to all of us. It sort of helps you to come to that point of what's really of eternal value that I continue to hold on to with all of my might. But what is temporal and is not important beyond even this life, that it doesn't need to take my center stage, and therefore repositioning even self becomes a gift during crisis.
So you find your true north once again. But just on that thought, because you serve the most vulnerable, the churches are closed, everything is under quarantine. How did you access? You're trying to raise some money to reach the shepherds, and even the people who give the money are also facing challenges. So how did you rise up and get this money and take the support to the very vulnerable?
What we have as Life in Abundance is a model of ministry that engages the locals. So it's the local church that is located in the community where we serve. It's a group of local churches within that whole region where we serve. So they are right there. The same goes for, we have work in different countries. But we have a team of Ethiopians in Ethiopia. A team of Egyptians in Egypt. So everybody is within their local area. And it was mobilizing these teams, almost like our response strategy. Mobilizing these teams, being in touch with them, a response strategy that encourages them, contextualizes where they are at, and then connecting with their communities in the local churches so that the community is right there. We empower these local churches. So initially when we go into a new community, we identify them, we train them, we equip them, we develop relationships and community structures that are able to support the work in the community. So providentially, it was activating those systems and working with those relationships and allowing them to kick in during a time that we may not go to the community, but they're there. I think the same applied to our partners. We have partners in the UK, in Europe, in the US. And before the pandemic,
Yes.
almost every month, we would have a team that's coming from either a foundation or a church in the global north, coming to be with our communities.
Yes.
So our partners knew these people almost by name,
Yes.
and knew our leaders by name.
Yes.
And there were relationships and friendships there that became so abled to continue working, even without us being in one place.
Wow, thank
so
you.
it was activating that.
Thank you. So there's a whole lot about the social capital you have built over time, the relationships, the local church, finding its place in this pandemic. So just before we finish, let's hear a few thoughts from Tom. Tom, what would be your parting shots at this moment? We have just a few minutes. What would be that last thing you'd like to speak to a leader somewhere in the globe listening to this and picking from the lessons? You've given us 3 important lessons, but what is your parting thought? I don't know if, Tom, you're still there. Good. Go.
I am here, and as I part, thank you for allowing me to speak and to participate in this discussion as well. The parting thought is simply this: it is embedded in Scripture, and it is the reality of where we are today. There is no crisis, there is no catastrophe, there is no pandemic that God cannot handle. And even though in the midst of all of this, we feel the pain, we see the results that are catastrophic in many cases, just like those Jews who were wandering in the wilderness, they ultimately were told that God had them and he had a plan for them that would become their promised land. I would simply say to church leaders, to Christians, to those around the world that are wondering, where is God in the midst of this? He's got it and he's got you. And let us remember that, especially as we communicate that message in our churches, that God, this is not something that God was surprised about, and it's not something that he is unable to handle. To God be the glory that we can give it all to him.
He has everything in control, and he has our lives in control. Thank you so much, Tom. What about you, Dr. Florence? What is your parting thought?
I think it's looking forward.
Yes.
Reimagining the future.
Yes.
A lot is behind us,
Yes.
but we are at a place that is filled with hope,
Yes.
that is filled with boldness.
Yes.
What this pandemic has taught us is a gift to us as we reimagine the future, because we are going into that having our systems tested, things shaken and sifted, to know what it is that we are carrying forward, what has been left behind. And that gives us opportunity to build on what is of eternal value. But I also want to say, it's really made it very clear for me that it's time for Africa. We had been talking about it's time for Africa, but it's time for Africa in reality. That we are actually leading the global Christendom, that the global South is looking to us to partner. And as we navigate and steward what the Lord is entrusting to us, I am certain the pruning that has come from the pandemic is going to put us in a place where we can steward a revival that is going to be of impact. So I look forward to what the Lord will do. I am so certain that we will look back at this time of the pandemic and be able to see the wine that came out of the crushing. And I feel our responsibility is now to build the new wineskins around this wine that the Lord has brought forth, so that we don't go back to the old wineskins because they will burst, but keep moving with boldness to the future that the Lord is inviting us to. I'm just thankful that he has indeed shaken not just the church, but us at a personal level, and all that we are entrusted to steward.
Amen.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Florence Mwindi, for such profound words that God has shaken anything shakeable, and he remains God. And thank you for the amazing work you're doing. You can connect with Dr. Florence. You find her contacts after this, and just see what they're doing in communities across Africa. and in other continents and just connect. And Dr. Thom Rainer, thank you so much for connecting with us all the way from the US. We're so grateful. And thank you for giving time to the Lord. The Lord bless you and keep you and shine his face upon you. And so, friends, at this point, we want to take a short break. And when we come back, we'll be going into the next speaker who is sizzling, is looking sharp, he's ready, he has a word for us to share. And so let's take a 5-minute break, and we'll be back right after this to focus on the next. Thank you.
Over 500,000 people call this slum home. The largest in Africa, Kibera is a place of desperation, its residents bound by poverty for generations.
Kibera has a lot of organizations, and they get what they want from you, but they leave you with nothing. A friend of mine just came and told me, Pastor Michael, I've just gotten an organization who's ready to work with us, and they are ready to partner with these small churches in Kibera. They have a holistic ministry. They are preaching the gospel all round. Mind, body, soul, and even minding the business of people to get income. Life in Abundance is a ministry that really empowers.
Life in Abundance works through churches and with pastors like Michael in places like Kibera to bring sustainable development to impoverished communities.
Kibera, as you know, it's one of the biggest slums in Africa. We identified so many needs that could be addressed. So we went back and it was like, let's prioritize. What are the root causes of some of these needs? And we began to work on those.
People stuck living in Kibera don't earn enough money to send their children to school, to feed them, or provide a safe place to live. To help meet that great need, Life in Abundance worked with local churches to start the Kanjo Shoe Project.
we began now the shoe project to teach these people how to begin afresh. And it was to just teach them basic skills and make a living. So we thought, okay, we will teach them how to stitch shoes.
I went to church as usual, and when we finished the service, our pastor Moses announced that we want 2 people in our church so that we may be trained as a shoe designer. He told us that your life will not be this way, the way you are seeing, your life will be changed. I was very happy on that day.
When I joined, we were taught how to make shoes and beads. I was so interested in beadwork. I focused on beadwork. People were interested, they were buying. I thought, oh, somebody can make money.
I was taught by the teacher who LIA brought to us how to grind machine, how to make shoes. I know how to talk with people, I know how to convince them, I know how to laugh and to bring my teeth out. So that's how I convince them. I don't look gloomy, I just look when I'm very happy.
As we are being trained on these sandals, we are also being trained on many things: how to network, how to mix with people, how to socialize, how to make use of environment, how to use your mind just to know what do you need and where can you find it without begging.
It amazes me that God uses the simple things in this world to confound the wise. That this was not something that we entrusted to big people, or it's not something that was entrusted to prominent people. It was the poor being taught how they can be empowered, how they can gain their own dignity and confidence, and beginning with the resources around them, identifying who they are in Christ and beginning to walk that they can come to a full potential. And this can be passed on to others.
Now, years after LIA has phased out and given complete ownership to the local community, the work in Kibera is continuing and growing. What started as a small shoe project has expanded into many other initiatives. The ripple effect is continuing in the lives of individuals and the community, bringing them hope and a future.
Life in abundance, it has taught me how to make shoes while I had nothing, and these shoes has brought me very far. I can pay the rent of the house, I can buy my clothes, even have educate my daughter, and I can eat in my house. I just feel very good and very great in my heart.
My son, the firstborn, is telling us he will be an engineer. The lastborn is telling us he will be a doctor. So we are praying over that, so that God may fulfill their desire. Now I'm happy.
When I got in life in abundance, I had a lot of struggles in life. I was so stressed. I never knew what else to do in life. But when I got there, I met people who can talk to me, who can encourage me, who can tell me it can be done. I was so encouraged. God helped me. I'm now alive again. It has given me hope.
So it's not development to just do the physical development. It's the emotional, it's the social, it's the spiritual. It's the relationships that have been healed. It's their children who've come back home. It's the hope of seeing their children finish high school, university. It's bigger than that. It's a story put back on track that the enemy had stolen. It's that life in abundance coming home.